I was still unsure of this series after watching the first episode last week, in part due to the fact that I think I was still shocked by Maria Hill's death, who after this episode does sadly appear to be gone for good. I was really hoping that we get to see a little more of her in some way, because despite her lack of screen time, I do like the character. But her sudden death to end the first episode really set the tone for what we can expect from the series. It's going to be darker, with a lot on the line. So while I may not have liked it, I do understand it from a storytelling perspective. But despite my uncertain reaction last week, this episode really got me on board with everything we're getting. It says a lot about a series when it doesn't feel like there's any huge moments, but I was still fascinated with everything. There are no all-powerful superheroes, huge action sequences, or massive connections and cameos for the most part, and yet every scene felt important and had me glued to the screen. Part of this is the pacing and tone, where everything flows nicely from one scene to the next, and it really feels like the dark, suspenseful spy thriller that I was looking forward to coming into the series. But while it feels like the connections don't carry the episode, the series is still part of a larger, interconnected universe, and there were some very exciting details throughout the episode. The episode starts off with a short recap of Captain Marvel in 1995, and then a short scene in 1997 for backstory on Fury's promise to the Skrulls. It shows the first meeting between Fury and Gravik, and then the details of why the Skrulls stayed on Earth, and why some of them are so angry at Fury. It turns out the Skrulls have been on Earth for longer than we've realized, even though this scene with Fury fits very well to start out the episode, after we got the present-day context last week regarding the conflict and all of that. I do think the Captain Marvel recap may have been better before the first episode. It's good to have the two flashbacks back to back. It makes it easier to understand and have a mental timeline of events. But as someone who hasn't seen Captain Marvel in forever, it would have been nice to get that refresher before going into the series and seeing Talos and the Skrulls again. It also looked like some de-aging technology was used, which I think looked really good because I never even thought about it until after I went back after watching the episode. But the peaceful tone is interrupted when the episode jumps back to present day, and the extreme violence and chaos was definitely a jarring change, reminding us of how bad things are now, and most of this episode deals with the repercussions of that bombing. Fury and Talos leave Moscow on a train, and even though the first part of the conversation about Fury and his past didn't feel like it completely fit with where the story was at, the delivery by both actors made the conversation very interesting and fun to watch. Talos name drops Emperor Droge while explaining the destruction of Skrullos, and because it was something that I don't think needed to be included, I wouldn't be surprised if it has some sort of appearance or connection to the Marvels. Fury and the audience learn that the entire Skrull population, around 1 million of them, is now scattered on Earth, which is not only a lie that Fury is very hurt by, but it leaves the door open for many of the characters we know in the MCU, especially those introduced recently, since I believe they didn't come to Earth until after the blip and Fury's disappearance. But it leaves the door open for many of the characters we already know to be Skrulls, since there are so many of them on the planet right now. I don't think this series will have time to dive into all of that, although we got a bit of the deception when it came to the world leaders and the Skrull Council scene. But this series is definitely laying the foundation for a larger story down the line. Which is also teased when Fury mentions later on during his talk with Rhodes why the Avengers can't get called in. It's an easy nitpick of many MCU stories to say, just get Thor or Hulk in there to fix the problem. But here Fury mentions how if the Avengers were brought in, there would end up being duplicates of them, having them branded terrorists because the Skrulls could shapeshift into them and ruin their reputation, which is pretty much what happens in the comics. But while in last week's review I mentioned how the lack of superheroes like the Avengers did leave a hole in the episode for me, both in terms of the action and stakes, that was completely resolved here. It's a smaller scale story, but this episode still made it feel like there were huge stakes and consequences to everything that happens. And while there wasn't much action, the meat locker fight at the end was interesting to watch, although a bit too quick to completely follow. The first episode was also a little rough to follow, because I didn't care for much of the characters. But maybe it was just jarring for the series to focus on a bunch of characters we hadn't seen in a while, because here I was on board with all of them. Talos didn't have much screen time following his argument with Fury on the train, but I expect that meeting with Gravik to come next week, which I'm sure will have massive implications on the rest of the story. We get a decent amount of Rhodes in the episode, and maybe it's just because I remember him differently as a character, or he's changed as a result of the blip and everything too, but he seemed much more stone cold, no free passes, very governmenty, if that makes any sense. He pretty much turns his back on Fury, leaving him on his own with pretty much no connections, although we did see at the end that he's apparently married to a Skrull, which I expect to learn more about and what she felt about him being gone and then off planet. Sonia Fallsworth came in at the end to interrogate the Skrull captured during the bombing, and this one scene made me excited to see more of the character down the line. Olivia Colman is perfect for the role, and is able to make this very capable and powerful and almost twisted character seem very refreshing and interesting to watch, with the way she delivers the lines and her tone and body language. The interrogation techniques she used were also unlike anything we've ever seen, at least in the MCU. Gaia had a good amount of screen time in the episode, although not a lot of dialogue. It still seems like she's caught in between teams, revealing the hidden base location at the end, but still unwilling to completely leave Gravik and this life behind. But the most interesting part of the episode came when she snuck into the lab, paired with her discoveries on the computer and the information revealed by the captured Skrull. A married scientist couple by the last name Dalton, which I couldn't find anything on from the comics that sounded like it connected here, are developing a machine, one that we see get turned on briefly in the lab, that will make the Skrulls stronger. Although I have a limited knowledge of the comics and Skrulls, this made me very excited in the moment because we see on the computer that the Skrulls have DNA samples of Groot, a Frost Beast, Calypsidian, and an Extremis patient, and those are just the ones we see on screen. There are probably more. Not only does this call back to other movies like Iron Man 3 and Thor, but what I believe is happening here is the creation of Super Skrulls, who were Skrull soldiers that were given powers, first on a cybernetic level, but what it appears to be here is a genetic level. What did you think of the second episode of Secret Invasion? Let me know in the comments below. Remember to like the video, and subscribe for more MCU content, and follow me on my various platforms listed in the description. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you again tomorrow.